And welcome to Virtual Campus Literature Week 2021. Today, I am very delighted to be speaking with author Celeste Muhammad, a Trinidad and Tobago native who has been a lawyer since 2001, but has been telling stories all her life. In 2016, she obtained her MFA in creative writing from Lesley University, and her goal is to dispel all myths about island life and island people, and to highlight the points of intersection between Caribbean and North American interests through her writing. Her debut novel, Pleasant View, is set for release on May 4th, 2021. It is my honor to introduce Celeste Muhammad. Hi,
Hi everyone.
how are you? How have you been?
I am good. I'm good. I've been busy. Pleasant views keeping me busy, but otherwise I'm good.
That's good. I'm really glad to hear that you've been well. Congratulations on the publication of Pleasant View.
Thank
Can
you.
you
Thank you.
can you talk a little bit about your novel and what was the inspiration behind it?
Well, in one word, I could tell you the inspiration: Trinidad,
Beautiful.
right? Or Trinidad, in three words rather: Trinidad and Tobago, but more so Trinidad. I don't think I've spent enough time in Tobago to be able to really do it justice. But yeah, the inspiration for Pleasant View. Well, in the simplest sense, Pleasant View, the book that it is now, actually started off as my thesis when I was doing my MFA. So, and how did the thesis come to be? Over the 2 years of the program, we would have to submit work every month. And it's very strict deadlines. And so you know how that goes. You're just trying to survive, just trying to hand in your assignments. And so I wrote quite a number of short stories. And then in the final semester, when I was putting together my thesis, kind of trying to select the 6 stories that I would put into the thesis, I realized, wait a minute, without me actually being aware of it, these stories were sort of linked, at least in themes. So I said, you know what? If with a little bit of tweaking, maybe I could turn this into a linked collection. So that's what I did to hand in my thesis. And then, like I said, at that point, it was 6 stories. And after graduation, I just continued to work on them, work on them, work on them. And then I added 3 more. So the final book is nine link stories. And I was able to work on them to the point where I would say, for me, it's more than a linked collection. Yes, each story can stand on its own, but I hope it is so linked that the reader comes away feeling like they've read a novel, actually. Um, that completeness. So that's that's how Pleasant View came to be. I don't know if you wanted to talk about the subject matter of the book, or if that's a sufficient answer for you.
Well, I mean, if you want to give everyone a little taste of what's to come, then by all means, go ahead.
But no, but before I move on, do you have any questions about what I just said about the link collection?
Yeah, I think that is really interesting because for me, I am really comfortable writing short stories.
Yes.
So I think personally, writing a novel is very scary. It's a scary thing. So it's very interesting that you saw that they all had a link and you ended up creating like an entire novel or a novel in stories, as you call it.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that is really absolutely brilliant. And I'm really excited to read it when it comes out. So,
But a couple things I should tell you. If you're scared of writing a novel, you're not alone. All of us are scared of attempting a novel length work. But short stories are a great way to trick yourself into writing a novel, because your short stories could become like chapters.
mhm.
And if you write enough, a teacher of mine during the MFA said to me, everything, no matter how long the book is, whether it's a novel, a novella, shorts, everything is built, the building block of everything is a scene. So if you can only manage to write in scenes, if you write enough scenes, you will have a novel. You know,
That's true. That's true.
So getting back to Pleasant View, you wanted to know a little bit about the subject matter. I would say what I tried to do in Pleasant View was sort of hold up a mirror to Trinidad society, modern Trinidad society, and say, look, these are our prejudices, right? These are as many as I can fit in here. These are our prejudices. Do we really want to continue like this? You know, so I'm trying to ask the reader to reconsider his or her prejudices, reconsider the things that you were brought up hearing or about people of another class, race, ethnicity, religion, reconsider them, and maybe we need to have a conversation about those things, because I don't know if you remember, if you were paying attention, last year, as soon as the election was announced, the general election, as soon as it was announced, the very same day, I signed off all social media, because I have been alive long enough to know what happens whenever there's a general election. It becomes so ugly, you know. And after the election, like I waited a week, then I came back on, and I think it was too early. I probably should have waited a month, because there was still a lot of ugliness in the air. And that happens every time. And then, you know, we're all outraged for like 15 minutes, and then it just goes back beneath the surface. And we pretend, we go back to pretending rainbow country. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, so I guess what I'm trying to do in Pleasant View is to strip off that veneer, rainbow country veneer. And it's not that it isn't true, but you probably have heard this quote by Adichie: there's a danger in a single story. You know, there's only one story of the Caribbean that is usually presented in the US or internationally, and there's a danger of that being the only story, because it's incomplete. You know, so rainbow country, yes, of course, but that's an incomplete story. In every rainbow country, you will have beneath the surface things bubbling, and I'm trying to air those. You know, because in my experience, every single person I have ever met in Trinidad and Tobago feels they have been the victim of prejudice. You talk to Blacks, Indians, whites, Chinese, Syrians, you know, whatever. Everybody says, you know, at one point or another, they have felt like they have been the victim of prejudice, right? And we are also, each of us, complicit in perpetuating certain prejudices, you know, not just even race, but also to certain religions. You hear people say things about, you know, certain religions and certain sects within religions. And yeah, Pleasant View is, I would say, a provocation, an attempt at getting people to look at those things and really assess if that's what they want to believe, and could you possibly have some compassion, and could you possibly see the other side of the coin?
And I think it is very important for us to also realize that we need to face those prejudices. And the powerful thing about being a writer is that we are lucky enough to solidify that voice in our writing. Um, so
Yes.
what's the process like for you in all of that? I'm sure that it must have been really, you know,
Involved.
yeah, to be able to, try to um put all of that in the novel.
Well, um, I would, my advice, my process, I think, is one that I would in some ways recommend to any up and coming writer, which is find something that you really care deeply about. Find something right close to your heart. And I don't mean that in a romantic way. Find something you care deeply about and start writing. And that's what I did. I wrote during those years when I was doing the MFA and writing these stories. I wrote about because I didn't have a lot of time to sit down and because I had deadlines. And so I wrote about what was at hand, what I was seeing around me, what I was hearing, what I was encountering in real life, what my friends were sharing with me, right close to your heart, write about things that you care about, and just try to write about them honestly, as honestly as you can without taking sides. And understand too that your first draft, your second draft, your third draft, your fourth, I could go up to 10 fingers. None of those drafts will be good.
Oh,
None of
yeah.
none of those drafts will probably see the light of day. Okay. Because like I said, I started that MFA program in 2014. What year are we in now?
2021.
So you can do the math and you can see how long it took. And up until last year, my very last revision of these stories was last year. No, I'm fibbing. Earlier this year, around January or so, when I looked at the what you call the advanced reading copy, the ARC, when I looked at it from my publisher, for the first time in all of those years, I was actually, deadline. So they sent it to me and they want my feedback. I actually had to sit down and read the entire book in 24 hours to be able to give my feedback. And it was only because I was reading everything in one shot. I saw mistakes that I had not seen in how many years, So I had to make some last minute corrections and stuff. I didn't see them. My editor didn't see them. My copy editor didn't. Nobody saw them, So I heard, I don't know who said it, but I have heard it said that a work of art is never complete. It is only ever abandoned. And that's true. I never feel like it's good enough or it's done. Sometimes I just have to be like, okay, well, that's it. I just walking away. I'm just going to walk away, put down the pen, walk away. So it is a long process. My writing process for this book was not a quick one. It was a long process, constant revision, and constant rejection, quite frankly, you know. But you have to learn, you have to develop a thick skin if you want to be a writer, and you have to take every rejection and use it for firewood, for fuel. I mean, I'm not saying don't hurt and don't cry. I have cried. I have collapsed on the floor of my bedroom crying. But then you get up, you pick yourself back up, and you make it a point to take whatever criticism that you can constructively and just do better.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Because the writing process really is a tough thing. And you really do need to have thick skin because rejection will come, even if at some point you think that this is the best thing that I've ever written. You will think that now, but later down the line, when you read it again, you would realize that, oh my gosh, why did I ever think this was great?
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, I I really appreciated that advice, and I'm sure that everyone watching would appreciate it as well.
Good.
It's very necessary.
Yeah, there's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, definitely. So I know Pleasant View is written in a mix of English and Trinidadian Creole.
Yes.
Now, as fellow writers, my MFA colleagues and I have had a lot of engaging discussions on our own experiences writing in Trinidadian Creole. mainly on the fact that it's a very oral thing. So there isn't a specific way to spell certain words. And a lot of people, a lot of Trinidadians tend to spell certain words in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So what are your thoughts on writing in Creole and how has that process been like for you?
Oh, I have so many thoughts. I don't even know where to begin. But let's begin at the beginning. Uh, it was very difficult for me to write in Creole. Very, very difficult. Understand, I spent my entire school career in the time that I grew up in Trinidad and Tobago. Creole was not called Creole. It was not called Trinidad English. It was not called Trinidad Patois. There were no nice names for it. It was simply called bad English, right? So for my entire school career, primary school, secondary school, it was drummed into me that it was unacceptable to speak Creole. Even in my home, I mean, when I was little, my mother would not, she would constantly correct us, you know. Um, so that we weren't allowed to speak raw Creole or whatever. Um, so yeah, so that was my home life, that was my school life. And then I went off to do law. And there is nothing Creolish about law, writing law or speaking law. It's all about the Queen's English. It's all about, Latin, really long, complicated sentences, old English, not even modern English, but, we are still using the old English. So that's my entire life, my entire career, everything. And then suddenly I go off to do this master's in writing thing. And I'm discovering while doing it that, you know what, I can't really authentically represent Trinidad culture in standard English. It's insufficient. Even if I'm just doing it in dialogue, standard English, it would sound so, like robotic to have the characters also speak in standard English, some of them. So I'm gonna have to write in bad English. So it started that way, trying to do that. And then I would tell you the very, 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 very first story I had. Well, you know how it goes in MFA. You submit your stories and then they get workshopped. Workshopped is a nice name for being ripped apart by a room full of people, right? So that very first story I submitted when it was workshopped, like I said, the dialogue was in Creole and the comments from everybody, most people, it was like, look, we can't understand this. We can't understand this. This is just too regional. That's what they would say. Too regional, or and things like that. And maybe you could, tone it down a bit. Those were the comments. Now I'm the only, not only the only person of color, the only small islander in this entire room, right? And that's what people would say, and in these workshops. And luckily, I mean, I took that. I mean, I didn't have the confidence at that time, now joining the program, to really respond. And also because when you yourself feel insecure about something, you take unfair comments as being true. So I took it on board and whatever, and I experimented with different ways, how to tone it down, how to do this. And then as part of the program, you had to study particular subjects. You choose what you want to study and you write like a little mini thesis on it. And I decided I was going to try to study the most successful Trinidadian writer I knew was V.S. Naipaul. And I was going to try to study how he used Creole in his writing by studying Miguel Street, very close reading of Miguel Street, to try to see what he had done, and other sources I researched as well. I also looked at Selvon, which is at the other end of the spectrum from Naipaul. Selvon goes all out, you know. So I studied the two of them, and I wrote up my little thing, and I kind of realized that, you know what, I think I would be most comfortable at this stage in my writing life then trying to mimic what he does, what Naipaul does. And I made a list of all the ways that he works with Creole to try to get across while not completely abandoning standard English, making certain accommodations for the syntax, for the, the order in which we put words, for the types of words, for whenever he would use a very raw Creole word, using it in a context that would suggest its meaning, things to do to sort of bridge that gap between full-on Creole and standard English. Or as linguistic people would say, from the acrolect and the baselect, which is what, try to find somewhere in between. So yeah, so then I started tentatively using Creole a little bit more. And then one day I just decided, you know what, I'm going to try to attempt not just putting Creole in the dialogue, but actually the narrative voice. So the voice telling the story. I'm going to try to just go there and see how that works. And it was very difficult because my own voice was getting in the way and saying, oh no, you can't, the narrator can't speak like this. But eventually I was able to kind of put myself out of it and fully, I would say, allow the character to speak. My natural language, or that I might want to speak in, I have to put that aside and let the character speak in the form that he wants to speak. So that's how and once that story, which I'm telling you about, that story where the narrative voice is a bit different, when that was the first story ever published in a journal, in a North American journal called New England Review, which is a very well-respected review. I think it's one of the top 10 or something in America. And the fact that they wanted this story, that they would publish it, all of my misgivings, all of my insecurity, everything just washed away. And I was like, okay then. Well, from now on, let's see how far I can push the envelope. Let's see what they will accept. When I say they, I mean the American literary community. Let's see how far I could go with this. How much can I push on them before they say stop? And that's so after that, the stories that were written after that, the 3 stories that came after that, were very much braver in their attempts to use Creole.
It's very interesting to hear, because when you said that, okay, how far can I push this? I remembered hearing a question. Who is your audience? Who's your target audience?
Yes.
And who are you writing for? And we get that a lot, especially with Trinidadian writing.
Yes.
Assume that when we write in Creole, Trinidadian Creole, we are writing just for Trinidadians. Why, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, like I said, I personally believe my style of writing Creole will not be your style of writing Creole. Yes, I try to pattern what I was doing at first off of Naipaul's style, but once you begin to gain confidence and a certain amount of flexibility, you will establish your own style, right? And I believe that's the beauty of the thing. Creole is agile. It is, as you said, oral, yes, but it's oral and there are no standardized spellings. There's no standard. And I think that's great because that makes it very agile, it evolves quickly. The Creole that we are speaking today, if we were to lapse into Creole, or if you were to go wherever you want to go, in fact, there's so many different Creoles in Trinidad, it's not fun. But anyway, what we are speaking today and calling Creole generally is a very different Creole to the one my parents would have grown up, or your grandparents, and that's because it is not standardized. It is alive and breathing and evolving and growing, and that's fantastic. And every writer, maybe in 10 years, the way I would be writing Creole would be different. We have to evolve with the language, and learn how to use it. And I lived in Belize for a bit, and about 4 years, right after law school. And they have gone a long way towards trying to standardize their Creole and actually teach it in schools, and have it respected as a language and stuff like that. And that's great, you know, kudos to them. I think it is important to protect languages that might be in danger of just disappearing off the face of the earth. We should protect them. But I don't know how much I want to see everything just get standardized. Like, this is the way you speak Creole. This is the way you write it. I feel that would certainly dampen to some extent the vibrancy of the language.
That's true. There have been a lot of conversations on
Mhm.
Creole and whether or not it should be standardized or should be taught in primary schools, secondary schools, if whether we should even start to write academic essays in our
Mm.
language. And what are your opinions on that? Is that a direction that we should consider going?
Well, I think that's a question for the academics. I'm not an academic. I think it really is a question that UE has to grapple with. UE is the University of the West Indies. And let's be honest, Trinidad Creole from, let me say, tongue is different from Trinidad Creole in Tobago, in Barracoa, up in the east. I mean, so many different ones. And then if we start going outside, Barbados Creole, Jamaican Creole, you know, so being the university, not of Trinidad, but of the West Indies, UE has to decide if it wants to accept scripts in Creole and which Creole, because a teacher from Trinidad may not be able to understand a script from a student writing in Jamaican Creole.
That's true.
You
Yeah.
understand what I mean? There's so much there that needs to be unpacked, and that really that's what academia is here for: study the hard subjects.
That's true. That's true. So as writers, we all face our own set of challenges that come in different shapes and forms. But a hurdle that we all share is that dreaded writer's block. So how do you deal with writer's block? And do you have any advice that you can share in dealing with it? Because sometimes it could be such a pain to deal with.
Uh, this is gonna sound strange, but it depends on what you mean by writer's block. Because if you mean writer's block in the sense that no idea is coming, I can't think of what to write about. Staring at the page, blank page, don't know what to write. I've never experienced that. Trinidad is too exciting. It's too exciting, a country, an island, and my family is too exciting for me to ever have nothing to write about. Right. So I've never experienced that kind of writer's block. What I have experienced is, why am I doing this? Is it even worth it for me to sit down and try to write something? Why am I putting out this effort? I just don't have the zest, to put out this effort, because it feels like I'm just treading water and not going anywhere. That kind of writer's block, the kind that blocks you from wanting to sit at your desk and do any work, I have experienced that. And I would say, actually, before Pleasant View was accepted for publication last May, I hadn't written for like 6 months before. Before COVID started, I hadn't written anything for a good long while, about 6 months. So, because I just was at a place where I was like, you know what am I doing? So, but what I've learned to do over the course of how many years, whenever I get into that place of not wanting to write, doubting myself, doubting the purpose of writing, And sometimes it happens after a rejection, you know. I start reading. And once I start reading, throw myself into reading, totally forget about being a writer and just throw myself into reading. Read for 6 months, read for 9 months, read for how long it takes. Once I throw myself into reading, just consuming book after book after book, I begin to feel that desire coming back. Because it's hard. It's hard. If you love something, it is hard to see somebody doing it and doing it well and be like, nah, I don't want to try that. You want to try it. It rekindles the fire and the passion, and it begins to give me ideas. I'm like, wow, look what she did here. Because I'll tell you this, after doing the MFA, it is now impossible. The MFA was good and bad in that it is now impossible for me to read as a reader. When I read, I am reading as a writer, which is sometimes not easy. It takes longer to finish a book because I would read like a page and then like, oh my God, did you see what she did there? Look how she, and I would have to read it over. So yeah, I read when I'm facing with writer's block. I read, and it usually goes away.
That's good. It's really nice to hear you talk about your experience like that, because before I started my MFA program, I don't think that I wrote anything up to an entire year. I didn't
Mm,
write it new, and before I submitted my application, I submitted it thinking I'm not gonna get in. I'm
of
not
course, yeah.
Yeah, there's no way I'm gonna get in. And the only reason why I applied was because I had the push from my parents, who have been very supportive, and I'm very thankful for that. But it's really hard sometimes to really sit down because you want to write, but you can't. There
Yeah,
are so many thoughts just going on trying to stop you from doing that thing.
yeah,
And it's really hard.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah.
I would say if it is the sometimes you can have a glut of ideas and you just don't know which one. So you just end up being completely, inertia. You can't move forward because you just have too many ideas. I've heard people say that. With me, yes, I always have ideas, but I try to see which one is pulling me the strongest. Where's the strongest pull? Because like I said, right close to the heart of your life and your experience. I start there, so that's one way if I'm having too many ideas. And also I personally believe, if you ask me, yes, okay, people, I'm a writer, yes. But I believe that writing and calling yourself a writer, I believe those are like misnomers. They're not the right word for what we do, at least what I do. If you ask me what I am a storyteller. I tell stories. I tell them using the written medium, but that is what I am, right? Uh, Also, so much of what I do in the course of telling stories does not involve writing in the sense of sitting and typing. So much of a story begins before I even sit at my desk. So much of it begins in reading. So much of it begins in, I would say 90%, not 90, that's over, that's maybe 70% of what I do involves listening, right? So the more appropriate word for me would be, I'm a storyteller listener. That's what I do. And yes, the mechanics of how I get my stories out is writing. But 70% of what I do is listening. And if you listen to what's happening around you, if you listen to the interactions that you have on a daily basis, you listen to the news, you listen to the things people say to each other, it's hard to not have ideas. You know, you listen to what people say and you listen to what people don't say, the subtext, you know. So there's a lot of listening involved. And also when I'm alone in my thoughts or I'm doing something, whether cooking, driving, whatever, I'm replaying what I've heard. I'm listening to it again, listening, 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 listening. And so by the time I actually formulate a story and come to my desk, so much has happened that the writing is almost like to some extent, an afterthought.
Yeah.
But you have to you have to disconnect. Sometimes you have to disconnect from the writing segment until it's time to go there, and just let yourself experience what's happening around you. Experience it, listen to it, think, look at a flower, really look at a flower. How would you describe that? Describe it to yourself, fully experience things around you. And so when the time comes to write, you're drawing on all those resources.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, we are so lucky to be living in Trinidad because there's always something happening in
Yeah.
Trinidad. Like you could be walking down the road and you would meet someone and their reaction to someone going down in a pothole. That is an entire story in itself.
Think
So,
about it. At the heart of every story, every single story is about conflict in one form or another. And you could be, as you say, walking down the road, there's a vagrant at the side of the road, somebody hand him $1. He say, I don't want this. Or you could give me $1. That's conflict.
exactly.
And there's so much that you could take from that little thing that you saw, that little interaction of conflict, and you could draw out in any direction, you know?
Exactly. Yes. So, I know you touched on it a few times, but you graduated from Lesley University with your MFA in creative writing. So, can you
Mhm.
speak a little bit about your MFA experience, given that you are a Caribbean writer, Trinidadian native, who
Mhm.
was enrolled in a program in the US?
Yeah. Well, naturally, I was the only one in my cohort. Um, the thing about Trinidadians that we're really good at kind of just fitting in, making ourselves comfortable wherever in the world we manage to find ourselves, right? What is it, Benjai sang? And we make good company. What song is that? Trini to the bone? Is
I
that
said
the song?
Trini, I
Trini
think.
to,
I said
as a
Trini.
Trini, yeah.
Yeah.
And we make good company, yeah. So it's not hard for a Trinidadian to pull up on a campus in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and just be the only Trini and just really get by and have fun and make friends. And so none of that, the social part of it was not difficult at all for me. But there was a certain amount of anxiety for me in, would my culture be understood? Would, like I said with the Creole, would where, how to write so that I would be doing justice to my culture and my audience back home, as well as be understood. Um, would anybody want to read what I want to write? Would any of these North American people want to read what I want to write? I'm not sure if you saw it, but some time ago, Prime Minister Mia Mottley gave a speech, and in her speech, she quoted uh, Peter Minshall. And I actually went and like listened, and until I found the quote, I wrote it down because what she said, quoting him, was a very, very important thing. And what the point he was making was that coming from a small island, being a small islander, you always go through life with this feeling of maybe we're not good enough, maybe we're not good enough. Maybe these things that we do, they're not good enough, you know. You always feel a little bit lesser. And this sense of having to prove yourself or um, and that kind of thing. And that's in us. That will always be in us. And that is why we tend to, no matter what, we tend to look for outside approval of our work, of our arts and culture. And to most people, you haven't made it unless you've made it. Somebody out there has said that you've made it, right? So of course I had all those hangups and insecurities going into it. And I just had to put one foot in front of me and just, as I say, surrender to the process and kind of look, this is what the people are telling me to do. I actually had fights. like fights and back and forth, and so with my mentors, my teachers at time, but they were such decent people and so keen to help me that they would go and research things. And then there were different there was a forum where persons of color, students of color, could come out and kind of say what their experience was. And I remember being very scared to do it at the time, but I did stand up and I did say, I harkened back to that same workshop I was telling you about. And I said how my work had been received and the things that had been said to me. And I said, you know what? If I have to pick up a book written about, you name it, and go and Google what this is and what that is and what this is, because I don't know, you know, why can't you do the same thing? Why can't you Google, you know? And well, when I was finished talking, it was a little bit emotional. People clapped and so, but I think they got the point that both sides, we have to do the work. We have to do the work. If I had to study about, the rolling hills of the green hills of England and whatever, and have never seen it, and I mean, come on, y'all could do some work here. And they did try. They did try, and I began to see that being the only one there was actually a blessing. And that's another thing. Life really is, all about perspective. Instead of feeling victimized, I started to see how this could be a good thing for me. Because if I really, really wanted to set my sights on being a writer of international repute, I would have to think bigger than the fishbowl that is Trinidad. And I would have to be able, I was very confident that anybody in Trinidad would pick up my work and read it, and it would be authentic. But I would have to get away from the safety of that feeling and put myself out there and be prepared to deal with those kinds of people. So let me use this time as a kind of sounding board. Let me use my time here to try to figure out how best to reach people who do not know anything about Trinidad culture, who don't understand, who are only willing to do minimal work. How can I reach them? Because if I could get them to read my work and understand it on some level, then the fishbowl gets bigger. So my editor, I have two editors that I use consistently, and they were past teachers of mine who stayed on in the role of editors, and they are not Trinidadian. They are, they've never been here. And I always consider it a great success if I could get them to read a story and say, yes, this is a good story. Yes, I understand. Then, yeah, okay, then I could send this out. I will not submit a story anywhere unless I get their okay, because if I could get them to understand, somebody else will get it.
Definitely. And it really is an issue where well, personally speaking, the comfort knowing that, okay, there are people in Trinidad that would read your work. Like, you also really need to realize that, okay, yes, there are people in Trinidad, but you also need to break the barriers and put yourself out there. So stemming from that, what advice would you give to up and coming writers who may want to publish their book one day, but are scared to take that leap or are not aware of the ins and outs of the publication process? Because again, personally speaking, I feel like a lot of conversation focuses more on writing rather than talking about the publication process and how do we go about getting our work published.
Yeah. What can I say? I think that it is important in an MFA program, at least maybe towards the end of the program, to talk to students about publication and to talk about manage their expectations about publication. But I think that prior to that, you need to not think about publication. While you are creating, you need to not think about publication, particularly in the early part of your career. Because thinking about publication will make you very self-conscious as a writer. Because it's like a little thing on your shoulder, looking over your shoulder, saying, "You sure you want to write that? You sure? You sure? You know, what if your mother read it? What if this one read it?" You know what? And trust me, I've been there because, like I said, when I started writing when I wrote that first story with the narrative voice in Creole, my mother was on my shoulder, like a little mini version of my mother was on my shoulder, being, "That is how I taught you to speak. Is that how I taught you to speak?" You know, it's like, and not just the Creole, but also the content. You will be a very self-conscious writer if you only ever think about publication from the get-go. You will censor yourself. And you don't need to be doing that when you are in, because there are at least two modes for a writer. There is the creative mode, which has to just flow. And then there's the analytical mode, right? And you have to allow yourself to enter the creative mode and just flow. Like if nobody's watching, you know, that dance like nobody's watching, right? You need to be able to write like nobody's watching, as if nobody will ever see this. Nobody will ever read it. You're just trying to get the story out. And later on, yeah, sure, at some point you can begin to talk about publication, but I find that a lot of students want to jump the queue and put the cart before the horse. You can't be focused on publication from the beginning, because what are you going to publish? What are you going to publish? What have you written that is of that caliber that somebody should publish it? No, it will get published in time if you do good work. You know, if you take the time to produce good work, if you take constructive criticism on board, because I will tell you, I would say my writing was like okay-ish, average, meh, for a while, until and as I said, I would fight with my mentors and so until the day when one day after like a really big fight with one of them, and we would fight writer style, right? So like I would write like a 10-page thing, and then he would write back like an 11-page thing, and we would fight that way, you know, using big words. And after one of those battles, I kind of just stopped and I said, you know what if I let down my guard and I just assume that he is right? And I believe that my writing changed for the better and took a huge leap forward the day that I made a decision to just, for the sake of argument, I am going to say I am wrong, and I'm going to say that he is right. And I'm going to do what he's telling me to do, not because I believe it to be the right thing, but just to see what would happen. And that's what I started to do. I started to just assume that my mentors that they were right and that I was wrong. And I would just try to do the things they would tell me to do differently. And I would always end up being pleasantly surprised at how much better. Not all the time they'd be right, but you know, how much better things would get. And it came to the point where I enjoy sending off a piece of work to my editors and getting back their criticism. I enjoy it. And I actually say, criticize me hard, rip me apart, you know, make me cry. Because I know that by the time I pick myself back up and I work through all their comments and stuff, it's going to be a better piece. So my advice to students is find somebody that you trust to criticize you. Find somebody who will criticize you honestly and not, yeah, girl, that's songing real good. Yeah, that's songing real good. If that was a book, I would buy that book. Don't go to people who will tell you what you want to hear, right? Find somebody who respects you enough to criticize you, knows how to give good criticism and feedback, and start taking it without taking it personally. Take it on board, and allow yourself to grow as a writer. And don't think about publication, just let your craft grow. And the time will come, yes, when you have to think about publication. And that's a different question. When I get to that point, then you have to start to think about putting on your suit of armor, because I think I've probably in my career so far, from I started submitting things in late 2016, and from late 2016 to now, I feel I've been rejected probably like, could be 300 times. There's a lot of rejection, a lot of rejection that you have to face. So if you can't take criticism, you are never going to be able to deal with rejection. And being published is not knocking on the door. Hi, Mr. Publisher, this is my work that I just think is fantastic. And he's going to say, yes, we're going to publish it. That's not how it works. It's knocking on many doors. It is kissing a lot of frogs before you find a prince. Lots of rejection. So make up your mind. And that's the thing. I think the process weeds out those of us who are really serious about this and those who are not. Because if you're really serious, you find a way to get past the rejection and just keep going, sending out your work. For me, my road to publication would not be, typical, simply because I did my MFA abroad, which meant that it opened up another writing community to me. And and the whole, it opened up in my life to friends and people who would be happy to refer me to an agent, or refer me to this one, or refer me to that one. And that's no guarantee that somebody will say yes, but having somebody who can refer you to somebody is helpful. So yeah, publication time, it will come, but I would say right now, students need to focus on developing their craft.
Yeah, I think a common misconception is that the publication road is easy, and that, once the book is published, that is your end goal. Once you are published, you are successful. But that is no, that is not how it works. Writing is way more complex, and getting to that state of publication is a long thing. And yeah, I'm very thankful that you spoke about it and you were very raw and honest about it, because a lot of us need to hear that.
Yeah, it's not easy. And I would say, if you really, really want to pursue getting little things published, again, I've seen advice from other writers where they say, have multiple things going on at the same time, which is fine when you're a little bit more seasoned. But the point is, it takes a long time. It takes years to write a novel, a good novel. It could take years to write a short story. It could take months, whatever. But there are smaller bits of fiction that you can write. Flash fiction is a big thing now in the US. So flash fiction can be as long as a sentence, or as long as 100 words. It's very compact. And there are contests, and there are all kinds of things for flash fiction, which doesn't take as much time to write, obviously. The very, very first thing I had published was a flash fiction piece. It was like 50 words long, 50. And it was published online, and it was about some children jumping off a pier, if I remember correctly. And that was the very first thing, and I was so happy. I was like, oh my God, I'm a published author. I was like, thank God, thank my mom, thank this one, thank that one. So if you are really publication struck and you want to do something that desperately, then look into flash fiction.
Definitely, definitely. That is something to look into, especially when I think creating flash fiction is there is not as much weight on your
Yeah.
shoulders as a short story, perhaps. So
Mhm.
definitely.
Well, for some people, I find it very difficult because I am one of those people who 50 words, that was really hard to do, write something in 50 words. Wow.
Yeah.
You know,
And to write it
but
well.
yeah, but some people are, they're natural and some people are really good at it. So yeah,
Do you prefer writing in short stories then?
I feel like I entered the MFA program by submitting an excerpt of a novel I had written in 2012. When I took a year off from law, uh, and during that time I wrote this novel and I submitted part of it to get into the program. And I went into the program thinking that, well, I was going to work on my novel and come out of the program with this really great novel. But my mentor at the time, she was like, you know what? You need to write short stories because you need to. Short stories are really good um, training ground. So you're going to write short stories and you're going to learn the elements of craft, the elements of storytelling using short stories, and you're going to do that. And then when you get those down, then you can decide if you want to write a novel. And so I went back to the novel actually, because I went back to the novel, was it last year or the year before, and started trying to work on that. And let me tell you, it is hard. It is hard to expand because a short story, like I say, it's just like to expand into, even though the novel was completely written from beginning to end the first time around, going back now after having done the MFA with fresh eyes and a better understanding of craft, it was really hard. I actually just had to scratch most of it. So, I can't give you any advice that could make you feel better about writing novels. I agree with you, it is hard and it takes a long time.
Yeah, it's really intimidating too, especially
Yeah.
when you have a set number of words, like if you're giving a set number of words that you need to hit, you think,
Yeah.
where am I gonna find all these words? Yeah.
I don't do that. I've never done that. I've never been somebody to wake up every morning and say, I have to write so many words for today or give myself a writing target of this. I have never done that because if I did that, I think I would have started to hate writing.
That is so interesting because I have spoken to a few authors and I always ask for advice. And
Mm.
so a recurring advice that I've gotten is always write something every day. If it's 500 words a day,
I
start.
don't. I don't.
Same here. I find that it's very difficult to do, yet it's still it across the board. That is advice that has been
Well,
shared.
let's just say I'm giving you bad advice, right? Because like I said, for me, I cannot speak for anybody else, but for me, writing, 70% of writing is not writing. 70% of writing is listening, thinking, formulating, marinating, so that when I do sit down to write, it's pace. And then, of course, once I sit down and I initiate a project, because by the time I come to the thing, I know what the project is. I know what it is. I know what I want to achieve. I'm going to sit down and from here on, every day, yes, I am going to write. Whether it be an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, usually about 3, 4 hours, right? I know what the project is. I'm going to sit and every day I'm going to write until I get through the first draft and then I'm going to rewrite it until I get to the point where I want my editor to see it. But to say just every day of my life, write of words for the sake of writing words, no, no.
It's really comforting hearing you say that. I know it works for other people, but
Mm.
yeah,
I would say that I am still engaged in the practice of writing by all the other things, listening, whatever, filing stuff away. I make notes on my phone all the time.
yeah, same
All
here.
the time I make notes on my phone thing. So the writing process is still happening, but the mechanical act of sitting down and typing is not happening every day, no.
Yeah. And another part of the writing process is editing, which is
Yes.
something that I personally struggle with a lot. So, how is the editing process for you, and what advice can you give to someone who
Well,
struggles a lot?
I would say, as I mentioned earlier, very early in my consideration of this whole thing as a career, I had bought a book. If I could find the book, I would give you the name. But it was a kind of archaic text on writing, not very modern. But at least the lady said one thing that stuck in my head, and she said that there are two modes: creative and analytical, and you can't do both at the same time. When you're in creative mode, you have to allow yourself to be in creative mode and to create and let things flow. And then you have to take off that hat and put on the other hat, the analytical hat, and do, take your scalpel and do what you need to do. So I would say those are the two modes when creating a story. The first where you're just getting the story out and onto the page in some form. And then the other mode is the analytical mode where you're revising. And revision stories are not really made in the creative act so much as they are made in the revision. You have to be really, really, really on point with your revision. You have to be brutal with your revision. Because of course, in the creative act, we tend to, and we go on and we feel good and we like up ourselves and, we write pretty prose and whatever. And in the analytical phase, you need to cut maybe 90% of that. Kill your darlings. That's the first thing they teach you. If you like it too much, you should probably kill it. Yeah, so you revise, you revision, 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 revision. And in the same way, I would imagine the way a panist or somebody tuning a pan or somebody is listening for the right note, pounding, 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 listening for the right note. It's the same thing you're doing until you hear it begins to sound, yes, whatever. And then you're like, okay, I feel I'm done revising. So I've done creating, I've done revising. And at that point, I have to have somebody that I trust to send it to for editing. And editing is crucial. Having a good editor is crucial um, because you just can't see. You become, blind to your own mistakes and the holes in the story. So having a good editor, like I said, who's willing to just respect you enough to be hard on you, and editors have different styles. Some editors will go through line by line by line by line. Others will just make one comment here, one comment here, one comment there, just give you their general feeling. So you have to find the one that works best for you. And then when you get back your document from your editor, you keep working at it, working at it, working at it. Sometimes what I do is I would read what the editor has said. And of course, I would get myself worked out. And then I would put it down for a couple of days, maybe a week. But all the while, it's marinating, marinating, marinating. So, as I said, when I go back to it now, I'm going back to it knowing exactly how I'm going to tackle what he or she said.
That is some really great advice. Thank you very much for sharing that. Especially the if you like it too much, you should probably kill it.
Yeah. No, no, seriously, because sometimes, you get your little groove on and you're sounding so pretty and stuff, and you're like, whoa, I'm a writer. And then when you read it over, if you leave it in there, because remember, nobody's supposed to be hearing your voice. Nobody's supposed to be hearing Pashala's voice, right? They're supposed to be hearing the character's voice. And so if you leave it, I've done it where I've left things that I like in there, and then come back around and I'm reading and I'm like, wait, what just happened? What just happened? Because we just went from being inside the voice of the character and the belly of the character. We just went from that to this very Celeste sounding sentence. And it kills because remember, when your reader is reading, you don't want to distract them at all from the story. You want them to enter the body of the protagonist and sit in there and forget. So you have them going along, and then suddenly there's like this. Could you imagine you have somebody who speaks Creole, raw Creole, and you're going along with them, and then suddenly you have them saying some very beautifully written piece of standard English, just because you like it. You know what I mean? So that's just one example. But if you think you like it too much, and if it's making you pat yourself on the back too much, probably should consider killing it.
Yeah, that is something that it's very difficult to like really accept too, because sometimes you just really love this line and it does not fit with this story at all, and it hurts to remove it, but at least we can save it and use it for something else or create a story based on that line. So
I mean, and when you delete those things, delete them but keep them somewhere so that you never know where you could plug it in and it would work, but you have to get very handy with your scalpel.
Yeah, Dr. Amai always tells us that, like, make sure you edit down and don't throw away anything. Keep it. You can probably use it in something else and you would never even know. So, yeah. So thank you very much. That is all the questions that I have. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I think we've covered a lot, and I thank you for the opportunity to say these things and share some of my experience with the students, because like you said, I'm not sure how realistic a lot of students, even me, when I was still a student, I didn't have the most realistic idea of what it would be like. If you had told me back then that so many years later this book would now be seeing the light of day and it would go through so many changes, I would have said no way, but thank you again for your very thoughtful questions, and I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you
and
very much.
Good luck with your writing.
Thank you. And thank you for generously giving your time and being so honest and raw and saying the difficult things that we need to hear, because that is the best advice that we could ever get as up and coming writers. So I'm very grateful. And I know that everyone watching would also be grateful to hear these things. So thank you very much. It was such a pleasure to be able to speak with you.
And I hope we get to meet in person someday.
Me too. And I certainly I'm looking forward to getting my copy of Pleasant View that comes out on May the 4th. Everyone get your copy.
I think paper-based in Normandy is one of the places that is taking pre-orders, and Scribbles and Quills in Chaguanas, they're taking pre-orders. And of course, it's available Amazon, Barnes and Noble, blah, blah, blah.
Yes. And if you can't go down to paper-based does deliveries, people. You can DM them on Instagram. So make sure you get your copy.
Okay, Shala, enjoy the rest of your evening.
You too. Thank you.
Again, bye.
Bye.